Hello and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I'm going to tell you all about the Misericordia Hospital. With over 200 documented ghost stories, Montreal is easily the most haunted city in Canada, if not all of North America. Haunted Montreal is dedicated to researching these paranormal tales, and our channel brings you new videos in both French and English every second Saturday. Today's episode examines the former Misericordia Hospital, one of Montreal's many now-vacant hospital complexes. During its sordid past, thousands of orphans were falsely diagnosed with mental illnesses, and unmarried teenage mothers were housed in hostile conditions within its merciful walls. But before we get into today's story, a massive thank you. We recently hit 700 subscribers, and Dr. Mab and I are just so grateful and humbled by this, and we can only hope that you continue to enjoy the stories we put out. With that, please remember, if you have not already, to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so that you get notified every time we've got a new story to share. And now, let's get spooky. The former Misericordia Hospital is now one of many vacant hospital complexes in Montreal in the wake of decisions to centralize services into two super hospitals. During its sordid past, thousands of orphans were falsely diagnosed with mental illnesses, and unmarried teenage mothers were housed in hostile conditions within the walls of the former Hospital of Mercy. Today, the building is abandoned by the living, but certainly not the dead. Considered a paranormal hotspot by ghost hunting experts, there are many stories of disembodied children's voices crying, sounds of clanging and abuse, not to mention the spirits of angry nuns and a fearful young mother. To put things in context, Montreal was a very Catholic city from the founding of the Ville Marie colony in 1642 up until the Quiet Revolution of the 1950s, when its power began to wane. This was especially true for citizens of French and Irish ancestry. Due to patriarchal Catholic doctrine, there were very strict rules to follow in life, and any serious violation could have severe consequences. Misogyny has been rampant in the church for many centuries due to the early fathers engaging in theological debates that questioned whether women had souls. In the 12th century, influential theologian Thomas Aquinas described women as misshapen men and clearly saw them as being inferior. During the Middle Ages and the era of the Inquisition, many powerful female mystics were persecuted. Some were even burned at the stake, condemned as witches. Furthermore, any woman who had a child out of wedlock was considered thoroughly fallen and disgraced within the Catholic society. The child was also severely stigmatized and often alienated and excluded. In the mid-1800s, a narrow rocky lane called Woodyard led down to the river, starting at today's René Lévesque Boulevard at the corner of St. André Street. In many cases, panicking single mothers would stumble down the rocky lane to the shoreline, child in arms. In a state of despair, some of them threw their babies and sometimes themselves into the dangerous and fast-flowing waters. To prevent such incidents, the Catholic Church wanted institutions where unmarried women could be sent to deliver their children under a veil of secrecy, silence, and shame. It was not uncommon for unwed mothers to be shamed into surrendering their children to the church. A powerful stigma was attached to unmarried motherhood, and abortion and the sale of contraception were criminal offenses. At the instigation of Bishop Ignace Bourget, the Congregation of the Sisters of Misericordia religious community was founded in 1848 by Rosalie Jeté. Marie Rosalie Cadron Jeté, also known as Marie of the Nativity, was a widow and midwife who undertook the overseeing of unwed and struggling mothers between 1840 and 1864. They opened the first Misericordia Hospital on the corner of St. Catherine Street and St. André. After occupying this and other premises which had become too cramped, the Sisters of Mercy ordered the construction of the first section of their hospital on today's René Lévesque Boulevard East, formerly Dorchester, in 1853. Over the next several decades, the facility was expanded several times. The Catholic religious orders prioritized work over education. The sons of unwed mothers could not legally inherit from their biological parents and could not become priests unless they had a special exemption. For many, this meant a life of deprivation, religious indoctrination, and feelings of guilt for their characterization as children of sin. The church was also poorly equipped to care for them. Orphanages had limited resources, and each nun was often responsible for watching at least 10 children under the age of 2. A Quebec ombudsman wrote in one of his reports that the majority of children spoke only in sounds until the ages of 4 to 6 and were incapable of telling time, eating with utensils, getting around, washing themselves, etc. In one trade school, up to 25% of the children between 9 and 16 were found to be bedwetters. The typical procedure was to bring so-called fallen pregnant women to the hospital to keep them out of sight in a cloistered environment. When their babies were born, they were immediately confiscated and placed within the orphanage. These children were then given away for adoption, forced to do cheap labor, or much, much worse. Furthermore, just 2 weeks after giving birth, the unwed mothers were expected to work for 6 months in the hospital to pay a debt for the services of the sisters. According to historian Jean-François Nadeau, they lived cloistered in shame. He mentions that at the moment of their reception, the nuns gave them a temporary name, such as humiliants or fructus, in order to remind them of the sin that they had committed. Imagine you're pregnant, you're left alone, and you're forced to call yourself fertile for 6 months, said Nadeau. Adding, an aide who was here as a nurse told me several years ago that she had seen one of these young women try to jump into the void from one of the floors to kill herself. The historian concludes that the hospital was a factory of poverty. There are also allegations that some of the orphans were experimented upon by demented doctors such as Ewan Cameron and Heinz Lehmann. According to researcher and blogger Anne Diamond, I have a photo of doctors Ewan Cameron and Heinz Lehmann standing with a group of other doctors outside the Misericordia Hospital in Montreal in 1959. This was a hospital for unwed mothers and also an orphanage. At the time, Lehmann was directing the Research Institute of the Allen Memorial. What are two McGill psychiatrists doing in a group photo on the steps of the hospital? What legitimate reason would they have to be there? I'm guessing the secret reason is they are setting up an agreement to get children for use in experiments. We know there were orphans living in a sealed-off wing of the Allen in those years. Diamond continues. Cameron and Lehmann were key figures in what appears to have been a eugenics program operating out of McGill. Lehmann had trained in Nazi Germany at precisely the universities where the infamous T4 eugenics program was developed. He came to Quebec in 1937 and was soon placed in charge of a major psychiatric hospital known as a place where patients were zombified with drugs and ECT. With changing times and practices, notably the secularization of health services, the hospital finally closed in 1975. A total of 159,665 babies had been born and processed since its inception in 1845. In a delivery room on the 3rd floor of an 1873 hospital expansion, today's 850 René Lévesque East, nearly 50,000 babies were delivered, taken from their unwed mothers and transformed into orphans. The Jacques Viget Residential and Long-Term Care Center, CHSLD, took over and occupied the facility for several decades until recently when it streamlined and relocated its operations. The original structure had begun to deteriorate and fall into ruin, forcing the occupants to vacate. Today, the hospital is abandoned by the living, but not by the dead, according to survivors and paranormal experts. According to many survivors of the hospital, it is haunted, as discussed on various threads on internet forums. One of them claimed, in the part where the unwed mothers were kept, one can hear crying and lamentations emanating from the old walls of wood and plaster. It is thought that the lives and sufferings of those unwed mothers will remain forever in these long corridors. Another added, there was too much suffering in this place to be forgotten. One survivor who visited in 2003 claimed, when we walked into the wing of the hospital where the single mothers gave birth, one had been abandoned for several years, you can still hear this crying of the abandoned little ones. There are also groans, tears, and the prayers of these single mothers, which are like the cries of the abandoned little ones, impregnated in the walls and woodwork of the establishment. We still hear them today in 2003. Yet another victim claimed, the nuns who were at the nursery were very inhuman. Animals were treated better than the orphans. Before asking, are there any other survivors who were whipped by some religious authority before or after giving birth to their children, or when they entered? Considered a paranormal hotspot by ghost hunting experts, there are many stories of disembodied children's voices wailing and crying throughout the hospital's corridors, not to mention occasional sounds of abuse such as whipping, lashing, and clanging noises. On one occasion, a ghost hunter even detected what he swears were the spirits of 3 angry nuns rushing down a corridor wielding 3 large wooden spoons. These kitchen utensils could easily double as weapons and were often used to beat the orphans or the single mothers. He also detected the ghost of a fearful young mother who was spotted crouching in a corner, cowering in tears. When he asked, "Are you okay?" she looked up at him with tears in her eyes, shook her head in sorrow, and then slowly dematerialized. The hospital's original founder, Marie-Rosalie Cadron-Jeté, may one day become a Catholic saint, as recommended by Bishop Ignace Bourget. The Vatican is studying her cause for canonization, and Pope Francis declared her venerable in 2013. As for the hospital, in 2022, the Plante administration announced the hospital will at long last face a metamorphosis. With renovations, it will in time house a new 17-story office and condo tower, as well as a homeless shelter, student housing, and social housing. In conclusion, the former Misericordia Hospital is a crumbling architectural reminder of the dark Catholic past that used to haunt Montreal and Quebec. With the waning of the church starting during the Quiet Revolution, today the hospital contains sickening paranormal reminders of the deranged past era. Vulnerable babies were ripped from their mothers and thrown into orphanages due to patriarchal and religious doctrine and enforcement. It's no wonder their desperate cries can still be heard today, emanating from the crumbling plaster walls of the hospital's long corridors. Will these spirits haunt the construction workers who will soon occupy the building? We'll have to wait and see. Are you a Montreal resident or perhaps a tourist who has encountered something strange in or near this vacant hospital? If so, we'd love to know. As always, we want to hear your theories about what could be going on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If it's your first video, we do hope you'll stick around for the next one. We post videos in both French and English every second Saturday. If you'd like to learn more about the organization founded by the talented Donovan King, it's all listed in the description down below, along with links to purchase tickets to in-person haunted storytelling experiences. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. We'll have a new video out in a couple weeks, but until then, stay spooky.